Here it is, the Atomic Amplifier-Box. It's finally out after announcing it at the NOM show. Atomic and Studio Devil has finally released this guy. I've been waiting for a long time, and I want to do this video just to kind of give an overview of the features and go through some of the sounds that are in here out of the box. And in future videos, I'll look at some of the deeper settings, using it with other pedals and all that kind of stuff. But first, I just wanted to really go over what this box does when you plug it in and go over some of the features. So let's check it out. So starting from the top here, we have your standard amp controls: bass, middle, treble, presence, gain, and master. So pretty much if you've used an amp before, you'll be familiar with all those controls, and they do exactly what you expect them to. Your EQ is here. Your presence just adds that little bit of top end and clarity. Your gain, depending on the model, amp model that you're using, is going to give you your distortion, and master is basically the power amp volume on your amp. On some amps, the master volume is where you get some extra distortion, power amp distortion, and on some it's more of a clean master volume. So depending on which amp you're using, you might be setting that differently. The reverb knob here is basically a mix level, so there are some deep parameters that let you change the reverb, more settings of the reverb, but in this case on the device you have just control of the mix for your preset. And then the overall level is basically your output level that you're going to use to set the overall level to the mixer or to your power amp or whatever device you have it connected to. Let's take a look at the switches here. So the amp style and amp channel switches are basically what give you access to all the presets that you have saved on the box. It gives you a total of 9. So the way that works is basically your amp style has a top, middle, and bottom setting, and your amp channel also has a top, middle, and bottom. So when you're on your first top position on your amp style, you then have access to 1, 2, 3 on the amp channel switch, and similarly on your amp style switch in the middle position and bottom position, you have again 3 settings that you have access to. Now these are basically generic preset settings, but you know, the way they've labeled them I think is very intuitive. If you choose to set them up this way, you can kind of think of your maybe your amp style, you think of amp style setting 1 is your clean tones, middle is maybe your crunch, and your bottom is your high gain. Or if you use a lot of one style, you might choose to set those up differently. Or you could say, my amp setting 1, I'm going to use all the same amp, but maybe at different levels of gain or different sort of presets. So you have a lot of flexibility how you set those up depending on what you want to do. But ultimately, if you think of it as having 9 different sort of amp and preset settings as your starting point, then you can go from there. And I think as you use it more, you'll probably find that there's specific settings that you're going to go to, and then once you have that set up, you don't have to hook it up to your computer anymore. Let's take a look at the last switch here, which is the cab settings, and basically this allows you to control which outputs have the cab simulation turned on. So basically, again, you have 3 settings here. The top setting will send the cab only to the 1/4 inch output. The middle will send it to both outputs, and switching to the bottom will only send it to the XLR output. So basically that gives you control. Keeping it in the middle will basically, if you have both of these hooked up, both signals will get the cab simulation. This is handy if you want to disable one or the other. Probably the main use case would be setting the XLR to have the cab output, and that'll go to your mixer or your your powered speaker, and then your 1/4 inch can go to a guitar power amp and maybe to a real cabinet on stage or something. And so that way you don't have the cap simulation happening there, and you can have 2 separate tones in that way. And then moving on down, we have 2 stomp switches. One is the enable switch and the other is the boost. The enable actually has 2 different modes. The primary mode is a simple bypass. So if you select it, it totally bypasses the Firebox, and turning it on just enables it. And then there's another mode where if you hold it down for 3 seconds, it goes into a channel switching mode. And so you can see now it's blinking yellow. If I click it again, it's blinking red. And basically what this lets you do is save a set of settings and amp style, amp channel switches, and all your knobs where you want them to be. And it'll remember that for the red channel. And then you switch it back to your yellow channel, and then you can change all the settings again and set a completely different sound. So this can do a lot of different things depending on what you want to use it for, but probably the most common thing is you'll maybe have a clean channel set up and you toggle it and go to your high gain channel, or clean and dirty, clean and crunch, crunch and dirty, all those combinations, whatever you need, you'll have available at a switch. And so a couple things to keep in mind with this overall is the knobs are what they call what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG. So much like a stomp box, these are gonna immediately respond when you turn them. If you have a preset that has some particular settings that you saved previously, it'll initially be set to those, but as soon as you turn one of the knobs, it'll update that preset, and it saves everything immediately. As soon as you turn a knob, whatever preset you're in, whatever channel setup you're in, it's going to remember that the last setting that you did. So in that way, it's a little bit of a switch if you're used to a regular amp modeler that has presets, and you sort of can save, make some changes, tweaks, and save it, or you can make some tweaks and abandon those changes and revert back to your previous settings. This doesn't exactly work that way because it's very responsive to what the last tweak you made, and it will remember that. So to me, I think that's actually something that makes this box stand out from a lot of other boxes, and in a lot of ways it kind of mirrors some kind of analog amp in a box type thing, or even like a true amp, where when you get to a gig, you're going to adjust those knobs, set it up for the room. You might have some go-to positions that you remember, or that you mark down, your favorite amp, but those knobs are going to get tweaked in transit, that type of thing. So if you think about it that way, I think that's really what this was designed for, and it works really well in that regard. And it also it helps you get away from the computer, it gets you away from the presets. You really use your ears to dial in a tone that you like for that particular day, and I think that's actually a really good feature of this. So this foot switch here is the boost foot switch, which is another switch that has multiple options. Primarily it's going to be set to out of the box. A lot of times it just turns on the distortion modeler, which can be a tube screamer or a fuzz or a couple other distortion types. And this basically turns on and off. There's also some options to within the editor to chain that to control multiple stomps at the same time, so you can turn noise gate on and off, reverb on and off, or a mix match of those. You can turn reverb off and boost on. A lot of possibilities there, and that's another reason why you will probably want to use the editor to control that exactly what you want for any particular preset or amp channel setting. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through all of the stock sounds that come with this box right out of the box. I'll probably do a separate video where I go into customizing it with the editor, putting in some of your own impulse responses for the cab block. And there's a lot of extra effects, EQ, noise gate, compressor. You can adjust the reverb settings all within the editor. But I wanted to first cover just kind of what you can do right out of the box. You never have to hook this up to a computer if you don't want to, although I highly recommend it because there's a certain amount of customization that you might want to do just so that you have full control over what it does. But really, this is where this shines is taking it away from the computer, just sitting there with your guitar and playing. So let's dig in and check out some of the sounds that this thing has right out of the box. So let's take a quick look at the channel switching option and kind of how it works. So what I'm going to do is start with this Recto setting that I have dialed in right now from preset 9. So remember, the knobs are reflecting where I last set everything. So you can see I have the reverb pretty much off and the EQ set this way, presence, master, gain. Now what I'm going to do is switch it into channel mode first. So I'm going to hold this down. Okay, so this is what is normally is going to happen, which I'm learning the device too. So looks like it remembered whatever I had last set in channel mode. So it's a little louder and there's some reverb and stuff going on. So I'm going to turn that off, make sure these switches are where I want them. So I'm on the back to the Recto preset. Get that reverb off, get these EQs sort of where I had them. This is where that wiggle to get to the setting, wiggle wake up feature is handy. If you already had your knobs where you wanted them, you can just kind of wiggle them and get them back. Alright, so there's my Recto sound. So now let's try and find something clean I can toggle from. So I'll switch there. Now I'm on my other channel. As you can see, there's a little bit of reverb, even though this knob is turned off. Once I wiggle this, or start moving it, so now you can see the reverb is totally off. If I bring it back up a little bit. So that's actually pretty good right there. A little more gain. And so the Ampli-Firebox is remembering where the settings were when I was on the red channel. So generally you want to set up your whichever your first channel is, get everything dialed in just how you like it, and then when you switch to the other channel, start making your changes that you need to, and try not to change your original channel too much, just because every time you switch between the channels, you're going to have to get the knobs back to where they make sense for the channel that you're tweaking on. So the less you change on the previous channel, the more that you can focus on the new channel that you're dialing in. So in this case, I got a pretty good clean sound here. If I switch back, so if I want to do something like balance the channel levels, that clean sound's maybe a little bit louder than it needs to be. Bring it down a little bit. Jump back to my distortion. So that gives you kind of an idea of how that works, and the change is immediate. So for live, that gives you that 2-channel sort of amp type control, which is super handy. And then you still have your boost. And one thing to keep in mind is your boost status, whether it's on or off, it's independent of the channel switching. So if I switch here, it's going to switch to this other channel with the boost enabled. And depending on what your boost is configured for the particular switches, what preset you're in, that may or may not be desired. You can get around that if that's a problem. You can get around that by making sure that the boost switch for your clean channel, for example, doesn't enable anything that you don't want it to. That way, if your high gain channel is set and you want this to be kind of like a lead boost, you can still switch to your clean channel and not have to worry about if that's on or off. And you still end up clean, which you may want. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of this box out of the box. I do plan to make some other videos showing a couple different uses of this. We can go into the editor and show some of those deep settings that you can tweak. Reverbs, I think one where you definitely want to sort of find the reverb sound that you like, because you only have control of this mix once you get away from the computer. Also things like noise gate, compression, those are things that the presets do a pretty good job of getting some basic settings there. EQ too is there. But for myself, I like to have noise gate off a lot, or maybe I want to control it with the foot switch. I don't use a lot of compression, so that I want to make sure is disabled on all my presets that I have set up. So I'll do a video on that. And then I also want to show this with other pedals, which I think is a huge benefit to this box. It fits on a pedal board super easy. You can run your delay after, delay if you want another reverb that you like more specifically, you can run that after. It takes distortion pedals really well, so you can also run this at the end of your pedal board chain and go straight to the PA, and maybe you have some other dirt boxes, some other effects that you want to just run into this as a clean platform, and it works really well for that too. So I'm going to do some videos to go into that as well, so subscribe to the channel and look for those coming soon. And let me know if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll try and answer as quickly as I can. But I hope this helped, and talk to you soon.